Today I'm interviewing Mayor Wallace Jones. Mrs. Wallace Jones has long worked in technology as the former Senior Director of Technology and Operations at Yahoo, the Chief of Staff and the Head of Product Operations at Facebook and eBay. Currently works as the Senior Vice President of Product and Engineering at MindBody. What did the mayor say when they banned straws?
Bring them back.
No. All right, everybody. This is the last straw.
Very good. Funny.
What made you want to be the mayor of East Palo Alto?
That's a good question. So what made me run for city council was that I wanted to bring new energy, new perspective, and new empathy and listening to the residents of the city of East Palo Alto. Of course, I admire all of my colleagues a ton, and I love the work that they're doing. But for anyone who decides to run for a political office, it typically is because they feel like there's some aspect of their own lives, the lives of many, that are not being addressed or looked at. And at the time that I ran, we had some, key challenges with traffic congestion, a lot of pass-through traffic. Our residents were getting really overloaded with just the sheer number of cars that were commuting from the East Bay in and out every day. And we also had some really clear challenges with our housing or lack of housing, particularly housing that could be afforded by lower and middle income families. And then we also had some new paradigms that were occurring in East Palo Alto. Namely, we had a lot of people that were starting to move in, and the sense of community and community cohesion was starting to feel a little bit fractured. And so I thought that I could work and fix some of that. When I was elected that night, I was selected by my council members to be the vice mayor of the council. And then the following year, I became the mayor. So I didn't necessarily run for office to be the mayor, but it was an honor that that was bestowed upon me by my colleagues on the council. And I loved it more than words can express. I had a great time in the role, and I had a great time really connecting with the people of my city.
How did you react when you found out that you were mayor?
Well, first I was surprised, and then I was excited, and then I spent some time talking to my husband about it, because for any elected position, basically what you're doing is giving your time to the public. And what that means is that you're taking time away often from your family. And so I wanted to make sure that my husband and I had alignment around me moving into this role, and also that we had a plan to continue to support our family, each other, and our children while I was in the role. And he was and is a great partner. And I don't think I could have been any luckier to be in office with a husband like him. So after he cleared and said, I'm supportive, go do it, then I just got to work. So I was surprised, and then I was excited, and then I wanted to confirm with the person who's probably most important in my nuclear family whether or not I had his support, and then I got to work.
Nice. How is it dealing with the pandemic as being mayor?
That's a really good question. And I hope that if you talk to any public official or elected official, that they're honest in saying that none of us anticipated that we would ever be serving at a time when a global pandemic hit the world. I became the mayor of East Palo Alto in December of 2019.
Mhm.
And the pandemic, at least in the US, wasn't declared until well into the first quarter of 2020. So, a couple of months later. So what I felt immediately was that I needed to put away some of the priorities that I had around housing and traffic and other things for two reasons. Number one, when everyone's at home, the pressures of traffic disappear, right? Because no one's really out driving. And the other thing is that as people started to be allowed to work from home versus going into the office every day, what we saw was a lot more people starting to exit the Bay Area to go to other places, sort of lifting some of our housing supply challenge that we had, at least temporarily. So instead of working on the things that I campaigned for when I was running for office, I turned my attention to when making people safe through the pandemic. And what I frequently say is that we're all experiencing the pandemic at the same time, but we're experiencing it in different ways. And so for people who are more vulnerable, whose sheer ability to eat and shelter themselves and care for themselves and their families during this time have been much more challenged and much more at risk. And so as mayor, although I was absolutely focused on making sure that everyone had access to testing and everyone felt a little bit more safe and cared for, that specifically from a policy perspective, what I focused a lot more on was making sure that those who were most vulnerable got a little bit more support and protection during COVID as well.
Got it. What is your favorite core value?
My favorite core value shouldn't be a surprise. It is love of learning. And, I say all the time to my kids, if life did not require me to go in and be a contributor in my work every day, I could easily spend every day just learning easily. There's a gazillion things to learn, and I only have scratched at the surface of some of that, and so that spirit of cultivating that hunger for knowing more, that willingness to pick up a book, any book, and delve deeply into a subject area, right? The idea that anyone would ever say I can't or that's too hard, right? These are things that really plague my conscience. I always want people to have a forward stance on the possibility to bring in more information, more insight, more understanding, more depth, and really try to create the conditions for that to happen with my colleagues, with my friends, with my family, and with myself.
Got it. What does diversity mean to you?
Mm-hmm. So I think in the last year, the United States has gotten a lot sharper in its articulation of diversity, inclusion, and equity. For me, diversity simply means having lots of different viewpoints at the table, right? And those viewpoints could be viewpoints that are coming from an ethnically diverse mix of people. They could be coming from a racially diverse mix of people. They can be coming from a racially different mix of people. They could be coming from gender differences, right? I mean, there's lots of different ways to bring difference to the table. Inclusion for me is about making sure that those that we have brought to the table actually feel like they have a voice in whatever it is that we are talking about or doing or planning. And equity is more about making sure that we have somehow made up for or accounted for the discrepancies that might be affecting different voices' ability to really contribute in a powerful way. So equality, I mean, if I think that the image that many of us love to think about when we differentiate between equality and equity is if you take three people, one tall, one medium tall, and one short, and stand them in front of a fence, where on the other side of a fence is a baseball game. If you let them all stand in front of a fence, that's equality. You've let them all have equal access to standing at the fence. But unless you take the medium height and the small height person and lift them up to be as tall as the tallest person, none of them are going to actually see the game except the tallest person. And that's equity. It's rebalancing so that everyone has an equal opportunity to see and contribute versus just inviting them to the fence, even if they're blocked.
Got it. That really makes me think, and I find that very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
After the murder of George Floyd, what were your thoughts or feelings?
Yeah, I had a lot of mixed feelings after the murder of George Floyd. Um, my first feeling was tremendous sadness. And the way that I typically process that kind of sadness is with my husband and with my children. And so I spent a couple of days just being kind of sad at home. And then I started as a mayor interacting with residents, but in particular younger residents, youth like 16, 17, 18, who were starting to feel a little bit angry, upset, wanting things to be different, wanting to organize protests. And when that started happening, I couldn't feel sad anymore. I needed to feel more like, how can I be a good partner to my residents in both keeping them safe, which was my primary goal, but also allowing for the voice of protest to really make its way into the public. So, I felt like, how can I be a good partner? And then some high schoolers invited me to be part of their protests. And that brought out a different set of feelings for me. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't partnership. It was more like, what is my voice? What is my stance? What are my beliefs? And how do I wish to make those publicly known? So there was a little bit of fear there about what if I say something that's not socially acceptable? What if I say something that's triggering? And so I did a lot of contemplation over that, and then I started to feel reflective. I thought about my own life, and I tell the story all the time about when I graduated from high school, which was 1992, well before you were born, Dante.
Yeah.
I remember a gentleman named Rodney King being brutally beaten in the streets of Los Angeles by the Los Angeles Police Department. And obviously there was a case against the police who participated in the beating. And those police officers were acquitted of all crimes. And when they were acquitted, there was a huge set of protests and riots that broke out in Los Angeles, right as I was graduating from high school. Wow. And I did not have in my mind at that time that I should participate in it, that I should organize something on my own, that I should express an important voice, I was really focused on going to college. That was my next step. And so my reflection was, what had changed about the teenagers of this era that's different from the teenagers of my era? And specifically, what's different about them than me, right? It was very personal. Mm-hmm. And after I went through that introspection, after I went through that, deciding what is the voice that I really have, what is the perspective that I really have, and how do I want to bring that forward after the sadness, after the fear, I finally found my way to contribute. So I contributed for the first time at a protest in Palo Alto that was organized by a young man. He was a student at the Menlo School, mm-hmm. and continued to participate not just in my political role, but also in my professional role as a technology executive as well. And really decided that now was the season for me to help us be better at this as a nation. It's a season for all of us to help us be better at this as a nation. And our silence doesn't really help move the needle, nor does our fear. The only thing that we can draw on to help us be better is courage. And so that's what I'm walking in right now. And that's what I really encourage all of us to walk in, so that we can will a different reality into existence than what we currently have, and make this state, country, and world a place that feels more inviting to all of us.
I already talked a little bit about this, but how did you address the murder and the events that came with the city of East Palo Alto?
How did I address the murders in East Palo Alto?
Yeah, after George Floyd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so East Palo Alto, our residents in East Palo Alto participated in at least 4 different protests. And for each one of the protest organizers, I worked with them to the extent that I could, to understand their protest, what they were specifically protesting, what they specifically wanted to change or be different. Also cleared the way for spaces to be made available for them to have their protests. Also made masks and water available to help them be safe during the protest as well. And in a couple of cases, I actually participated directly in the protest. Unfortunately, protesters do not always consider all of our schedules. And for some of us who have to work, we do have to, kind of figure out when we're going to jump in and be part of, a political protest versus going to work every day and caring for our families. And so I had to make some of those hard choices, because mayors of cities like mine are, as you mentioned at the beginning of this video, typically bivocational, meaning they have 2 different jobs at the same time, minimum. So I did have to find a balance in when I could physically participate and lend my voice to the movement versus being a supportive leader that allowed the protest to happen. And I even had to, wrestle a little bit with, my own conscience on this, because what I found was that for many of the protesters, I wanted to interact with them like a mother, right? And most mothers would say, hey, people are really sick outside. We're in a global pandemic. You're going to bring a lot of people together, and you're going to facilitate a lot of spread, right, of this disease that we don't quite understand. And so all things equal, most mothers, I believe, would try to discourage their children from having a protest period, particularly one that's going to bring out thousands and thousands of people that are standing together in close quarters. So I really wrestled with that feeling and that perspective versus the belief that protesters have to be given a microphone, no matter what they're protesting, whether I agree with it or not. In this case, I did, but this is for protesting in general. I think protesters have to be given the right to speak because when you try to um, diminish that right, I think you just create anger and lots of other unproductive feelings. So that that's sort of where I landed. That's how I participated, and frankly, I'm still participating in this movement, right? Because there are new practitioners, new professionals, new questions to be answered, new solutions to be offered, new ways of looking at problems, new books that are being written, new forums that are coming together, right? And this is sort of a lot of which is sort of bubbling up out of um, that egregious event. But that obviously that wasn't the first, or nor will it likely be the last of such an egregious event. It just happened to be a point in time where so many people were really organized around watching, seeing, and trying to change an outcome, right? At a time that when so many people had been laid off from work and so many people were scared already and triggered about COVID. And, there were so many other things going on. It was like the perfect storm to bring a lot of focus to something that has been happening for hundreds of years. And so, from my perspective, this is not a once and done. It's not we have a protest and we go home and declare victory. It's really, sort of the leaping point for real work to begin. It's the leaping point for real change to begin. And what I hope for all of us, those who participated and those who watched from the sidelines, is that that change starts to really take hold of us, that it drives us to want to increase our understanding of why some of these things might be happening, and that it also strengthens our courage and our commitment to driving towards a new and different future for our children and for our children's children. So I'm excited about that. And I don't love that George Floyd was killed, but I love the impact that his life had on me from the perspective that it has triggered me to do and be something different than I was. And I hope that it has triggered millions, if not tens, if not hundreds of millions of people to do and be something different than they were, so that we can collectively be even better than we are.
We're about to enter February Black History Month. Who is your favorite African American activist?
Whoa, that is such a big question, and it's impossible for me to boil it down to any one. What I will say is that we are distant cousins of Martin Luther King, so he will always be an iconic figure in our family and in our household. And we always pay our deferential respect for the huge sacrifice that he gave to this country, and for his short-lived life. Right, he only lived till he was 39 years old, which is 8 years younger than I am today. So we're always going to be incredibly grateful to him, but he stands on the shoulders of giants, and he is a giant on which many that followed him also stand. So, when I think about, the vast array of contributors to this work, there are people that come to mind that we don't even talk about. Like, I think Nina Simone was phenomenal. I mean, she led a protest and a movement in her work that probably caused her to have to sacrifice a lot of her popularity, because she was speaking at a time when I think that the public would have preferred for her to say less about racial dynamics. And she was saying more, right? So she was blacklisted in a lot of ways. I think of Cicely Tyson, who just passed away at the age of 96, but who was a pioneer, a true pioneer in the realm of drama and acting. I mean, she was just like one of the most extraordinary actresses, and really had this very strong position that she would never play a role, period, that did not honor her, that did not honor women, and that did not honor the Black community. She was firm about that. And so there were tons of roles that she stepped over and didn't take because she did not believe that they were of the right ilk, that to be worthy of her time and talent, right? Which says a whole lot. I mean, I think about Shirley Chisholm, who, although we are all super excited about Vice President Kamala Harris's recent confirmation into the office of Vice President of the United States, Shirley Chisholm ran for president back in the 1970s. It was 1972. And while she did not become the candidate that was advanced on the Democratic ticket, whoa, does it say a lot for a woman to run for the office of president just a few years after the civil rights bill had been passed in the United States, and just a few years after many Black Americans were for the first time given the legal right to vote in this country, right? So what a trailblazer, how courageous. I say all the time that our vice president is standing on her shoulders, and many now are conjuring up her name as we are starting to see a new day with a new president and a new vice president in office. So my list goes on and on and on. And to your point earlier about equity, at times, I think we overlook the extent to which we mute voices by not creating a stage or an audience or storytellers to tell stories, right? Ultimately, the way that we remember history is the way that the storytellers tell it, because the people who were involved in the action at the time, they die, right? They don't persist forever. Mm-hmm. So what keeps our sense of history alive is the storytellers that tell the story and the audiences that take those stories in. And so what I would love to see for the Black community is even more emphasis placed on giving voice to the stories, giving audience to the stories, right? We can learn a lot more, a lot faster as people and as a country if we would allow ourselves to love learning and allow ourselves to really delve into some of the incredible stories that have been forged over time, some deeply painful, some incredibly triumphant, all stories nonetheless that need to be told and need to be heard. And that is what I really look forward to in Black History Month, and what I hope persists well after the month of February, our collective will to empower storytellers and to be audience and learners for the stories that will be told.
Who do you think had a better method to get equal rights for African Americans, Malcolm X or Martin Luther King?
Well, given what I've already said about my my late cousin, what I would say is this. I think that when we go back to this idea of diversity, that even in the Black community, we are not a monolith, right? There are many voices, many perspectives, and many ways of trying to move us towards a better version of ourselves. What I will say is that both of their practices, principles, and beliefs are so important to the history of America and so important to me. In fact, I am currently reading a book about Malcolm X, believe it or not, that's called The Dead Are Arising, The Life of Malcolm X. And what I love about that story is that it focuses a lot on Malcolm, but it shares with the reader a lot more about his mom and dad, and the values that he was raised in and around, along with his siblings and his experience with his siblings. So it kind of gives a lot more information about what made him the man that he was, and builds a lot more insight into who he was as a leader in this country. So what I would say is, I'm not prepared to say who I liked better. I am prepared to say that we need the benefit of all of those voices to collectively tell all of the story of Black people in America. And I appreciate deeply the the things that each of them brought forward to help make our story even more rich in America.
Did you like the interview?
I love the interview. Dante, you should interview me all the time, or maybe next time I'll interview you. I love the depth of your questions. I love your curiosity. I've known you obviously since you were in preschool, so I love to see you in your awesome little suit. And I can't believe that you are getting ready to go to middle school. What a big step. So I just want you to know that my door is always open, whether I am a city council member or not, whether I am the mayor or not, whether I am an executive or not. I am always available to you just because I'm Jocelyn's mom. And we love you deeply and are so grateful that you included us in your interviews for Black History Month.
Thanks so much. Mayor Wallace Jones, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dante.